Hello, and welcome to another one of my videos. I decided to start a new series to my YouTube channel called Short Lines of Western New York. Today, we will be taking an in-depth look at the Rochester and Southern Railroad, as with other railroads in this series. Let's get right to it. Chapter 1. Trackage and History. The Rochester and Southern Railroad, reporting mark RSR, is a Class 3 short line that runs from the city of Rochester in Monroe County to Silver Springs, New York. The RSR started in 1986 when the B&O sold off its Buffalo and Rochester branches. The trackage was purchased by Genesee and Wyoming Incorporated and split into two railroads, the Buffalo and Pittsburgh Railroad and the Rochester and Southern Railroad. The Rochester branch was scrapped from Silver Springs south to Machias, New York. The R&S is one of over 100 railroads that is owned by the Genesee and Wyoming. The R&S interchanges with CSX in Rochester, New York at Goodman Street Yard. The Livonia, Avon, and Lakeville interchanges with the RSR at the Brooks Avenue Yard. Until 2003, the RSR also interchanged with the Genesee and Wyoming Railroad in Caledonia, as well as with the Norfolk Southern's Southern Tier Line in Silver Springs. Since 2003, the G&W Railroad ceased to be and was made part of the Rochester and Southern. The trackage, owned today by the R&S, except for the GNWR subdivision, was constructed by the Rochester and State Line Railroad, which began operations on January 28, 1878, between Rochester and Salamanca, a town that is now on RSR's sister railroad, the Buffalo and Pittsburgh Railroad. The name changed to the Rochester and Pittsburgh Railroad in 1881 and was absorbed into the Buffalo, Rochester, and Pittsburgh Railway in 1886. The line was purchased by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in 1932, which maintained ownership of the line as the chassis system and CSX before the line between Rochester and Silver Springs was sold to GWI in 1985. Operations under the new railroad, the Rochester and Southern, began in 1986. The RSR main line to Silver Springs formerly continued along the BRP and B&O lines through southern Wyoming and northern Allegheny counties through the Machias Junction and beyond Ashford Junction. The line between Silver Springs and Machias was abandoned and later removed in the early 1990s after sister line B&P took over operation of the southern portion of the line. Chapter 2. Operations. A typical day on the Rochester and Southern Railroad starts at the Brooks Avenue Yard located on the west side of the Rochester Airport. All trains originate and terminate here, making it easy to catch the action. Trains run every weekday with an occasional weekend extra, depending on the number of cars. There are two main road trains on the R&S, one that runs to Silver Springs to interchange with Norfolk Southern, and one that runs to the American Rock Salt Mine in Mount Morris, New York. The railroad assigns train symbols by the crew that's operating the train, but for simplicity's sake, symbol RS1 is the run to the NS interchange at Silver Springs, and GW1 is the run to the salt mine in Mount Morris. There are also local trains that do most of the switching on the R&S. BL1 is the train that usually switches industries along the R&S and G&W subs. BY1 is the train that switches Brooks Avenue Yard itself and the industries along the Beltline sub. BY2 is the train that runs to CSX's Goodman Street Yard to interchange with CSX. Once it gets onto the CSX, the symbol changes to a CSX symbol so it won't confuse the dispatcher. The usual symbol it changes to is Z436. During the spring, summer, and fall seasons, RS1 to Silver Springs is the daylight run, with GW1 to Mount Morris running after dark using the same power as the daytime RS1. During the winter, however, these schedules flip, with GW1 to Mount Morris being the daylight train and RS1 being the nighttime run. This is due to the higher demand of salt during the winter, and the changed schedule facilitates the loading of more trucks at the salt mine during the daytime in the winter season. Chapter 3. Engines. On this X-chassis system line, there are 9 locomotives that run back and forth. RSR 879, RSR 2030, BPRR 3032, BPRR 3063, BPRR 3064, BPRR 3101, BPRR 3103, BPRR 3331, and WCOR 3346. In this chapter, I'll give a little background of each locomotive, where it came from, and when it was brought to the R&S. Let's jump right into it. Number 879 is an EMD GP9 that was originally built for the Norfolk and Western in 1959 and kept its number for 63 years as of now. 879 isn't used much on the bigger road trains due to it being a small locomotive. 879 is mainly used on BL1, BY1, and BY2. 879 has been on the R&S since around 2010. Next up is 2030, which is an EMD GP38-2. 2030 has quite the history of railroads. 2030 was built in March of 1971 as Penn Central number 7937 and was on 5 different railroads. Penn Central and was numbered 7937, Conrail numbered 7937, CSX numbered 1997, GMTX numbered 2634, BPRR 2030, and now it was officially bought by the R&S is now RSR 2030. Number 2030 was put onto the R&S between late 2013 and early 2014 and has been there for 8 years and counting. Next is 3032, which is an EMD GP40-2. 3032 was formerly CR and PC 3137 and KYLE and BPRR 3111. 3111 was then numbered to 3032 and it now exists on the R&S. He has been on the R&S since mid-2014. Next is 3063 and 3064. This little dynamic duo was originally built for the Southern Pacific between 1967 and 1969. 3063 got brought in early 2018, while 3064 came onto the R&S in late 2019. These two were originally B&P SD45s, but then were downgraded to SD40-2s but kept their SD45 car bodies. Next on the list is 3101, which is an EMD GP40. 3101 was built in 1967 for the New York Central and was numbered 3056. After NYC, it was sent to Penn Central, still numbered 3056. Then the unit went to the R&S itself in 1987 and was renumbered to 101. Then in 1990 it was sold to the B&P and kept its number. Between 2005 and 2008 it was renumbered to 3101. Next is 3103, which is an EMD GP40. 3103 is also a New York Central built locomotive, its starting life as NYC 3079 in 1967. After NYC, Penn Central bought it and it became Penn Central 3079 around 1968. Then, around another 10 years later, Conrail bought it and it became CR 3079. And then around 1986, it was sold to the R&S and was numbered 106. In 2007, it was sold to the B&P and numbered 3103. And then just a year later, it was brought to the R&S. Now, it's to the locomotive that I've seen too much of, 3331. Number 3331 was originally built in January of 1970 and is an EMD SD40 for the Canadian National Railroad and would be numbered 5146. Then around the year 2000, Alstom Canada, or GCFX, bought the locomotive and renumbered it to 6068. Then around 2008 and 2011, BPRR had bought it and renumbered it to 3331. It was brought to the R&S line around 2020, making it the newest addition to the R&S line. Last but not least, 3346. 3346 was built in August of 1971 for the Canadian National Railroad and was numbered 5205. 3346 has quite the unique history. After CN, KCS bought it in 2000 and renumbered it to 6639. Then around a year later, GTW bought it and it became one of those CN quote-unquote gray ghosts, and they renumbered it to 5956. I can't find any info of it when it was bought by WCOR, but I know that it was brought to the R&S with WCOR logos in mid to late 2017. 3346 also recently suffered a small engine fire. Now, there are a few locomotives that are stationed in Retzoff for the Retzoff salt mines, but I'll include those in another video. Chapter 4. Rebuilding. Along with freight service, the R&S also serves AMP, or American Motive Power. American Motive Power is a rebuilding and repairing center in Dansville, New York. AMP has mainly served CP and CN, but in the past, there has been other customers such as GECX, LTEX, BNSF, and others. AMP does pretty minor fixes and rebuilds, such as PTC updates, minor casualties, etc. Some unique visitors include CN 8952, multiple CP Maroon units, Illinois Central units, and much more. Since CN and CP go to Buffalo, New York, CSX can bring them to the Goodman Street Yard to be brought up on BY2 and then down to AMP on BL1. Usually, if it's a different railroad, such as GECX, LTEX, and others, normally it's brought on a different train that works the Goodman Street Yard like M560. Well, that's going to do it for this first episode of Short Lines of Western New York. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to be notified of upcoming videos from me, hit the subscribe button and click the bell. If I missed some information or something that was wrong, leave a comment. Also, thanks to Train Place 123 for photos of the locomotives. I'll see you guys down the line.